Anthony Joshua's next fight will be against Charles Martin for the IBF heavyweight title on April 9th. This is a very bold move by Joshua and his team, potentially a foolish move. And why do I say that? Well, Eddie Hearn, Joshua's promoter, and actually Joshua himself, in a few recent interviews, had talked about the potential pitfalls of taking this fight right now. Joshua's had how many fights? I believe it's 16 fights now he's had, 15 or 16 fights. He's still in the development stages. So let's say he goes and beats Charles Martin, which a lot of people think he probably will. He's then a world champion and he'll be forced to face people within the IBF top 10 or top 15. And he'll also have to face a mandatory within a certain amount of months. Now, when Charles Martin won the IBF title from Glasgow, the IBF came out and said that Martin had 12 months before he had to face his mandatory. Now, the way that mandatories work, if Joshua was to beat Charles Martin, which would be roughly 3 months after Martin won his title, that means Joshua would then only have 9 months before he has to face his mandatory. Let's say someone came and beat Joshua in the voluntary 3 months after that. Joshua would, the winner, the guy who beat Joshua would only have 6 months to defend his title, etc., etc. That's how it works. So Joshua, his learning stage of his career will be over if he, once he steps in the ring and if he beats Charles Martin. So that's the issue that I have with it. And even himself and Eddie Hearn had talked about that as a potential problem. And when you look at champions of the past, when you look at Mike Tyson, he had nearly 30 fights or around 30 fights when he challenged for the world title. Vladimir Klitschko had 35 fights when he challenged for the world title. Vitaly Klitschko had about 25 fights. Tyson Fury just had his first world title fight and he was 25 fights in. So for Joshua to take a world title fight with so few fights I don't think it's particularly wise. If you were someone who had a massive, extensive amateur background, which went on for several years, like Lomachenko, for example, someone like that, or Guillermo Rigondeaux, then yeah, you could jump into a world title fight, 16 fights in or whatever, because you've honed your technique and your skills and your abilities over a very, very long period of time, since you were a young child. But with Joshua, he started boxing relatively late. He was already, I believe, nearly 20 years old by the time he first ever laced up a pair of boxing gloves. So he don't have that extensive amateur background that a Lomachenko or a Guillermo Rigondeaux does. He's still trying to refine his technique and perfect his craft. He's still trying to do that now. And I think that he needs a few more fights on the Dylan White type level, or maybe European level, before stepping up to face a Charles Martin. As I say, he may beat Martin, but what happens after that? And as I've already said in this video a couple of times, himself and Eddie Hearn are well aware of that. Now, if he does beat Martin, you can see here the IBF rankings on screen. These are the current rankings. So the first 2 slots are empty at the moment because there hasn't been an eliminator fought yet. And the IBF had talked about an eliminator between Joshua himself and Carlos Takam, which is a fight that Joshua and his team were considering as well. But now that he's gone straight for the title shot, then I guess that's out the window. So then you're going to look at an eliminator between Takam and Joseph Parker. Will Joseph Parker take the eliminator? I don't know. Let's say he did. Let's say he takes the eliminator against Takam. That would mean that the winner of that fight would be Joshua's mandatory, which he would then have to face in approximately 9 months' time. So in between, if he beat Charles Martin, in between beating Martin and his mandatory, he might be able to fit 1, possibly 2 voluntaries in there. And the IBF are quite strict about mandatories. They're not as lenient as the other organizations are. If you move further down the line, you got Glaskov, who's out injured. Obviously, number 3, I forgot to mention, you got Tepa, but, we can forget about Tepa because he's out for 2 years on a drugs ban. Yeah, number 7, you got Glaskov, who's out injured, so you can forget about him. Number 8, they got Steve Cunningham. Cunningham announced that he was moving back down to cruiserweight recently. I don't know whether he's reversed that decision or whether he's willing to go up or down depending on opportunities. I don't know. But interestingly enough, they do have Cunningham in at number 8. Below that, they got Andy Ruiz at 9, Stavern 10, Pulev 11, Helenius 12, Chisora 13, and 14 and 15, Ustinov and Dominic Breazeale. Now, out of this list of fighters, you're going to have Joshua picking his voluntary defenses out of there before he has to face his mandatory. And there's a few candidates there for a voluntary defense. The obvious one would be Derek Chisora. But Chisora apparently has a fight lined up against Kubrat Pulev. So maybe the winner of Chisora Pulev, or because obviously the loser of Chisora Pulev may drop out of the top 15 in the IBF rankings altogether. You have to bear that in mind. And if they drop out of the top 15, then I believe they won't be eligible for a world title shot against Joshua. So anyway, Derek Chisora would be the obvious candidate for a voluntary for Joshua. You got Robert Helenius there. Helenius is about to fight Johan Dupar or Duhapas or whatever, however people pronounce it. He's about to fight that guy Dupar who Deontay Wilder just beat. So you could possibly, if Dupar was to win, you might have Joshua against Dupar, or you could have Joshua fighting Helenius for a voluntary. Possibly Joshua against Stavern is a voluntary as well. Joshua against Pulev. Obviously, the higher up you get in the ranking, the more dangerous it tends to be. So Steve Cunningham as well, possible voluntary. Let me know what you think, guys. What do you think about these particular rankings with regards to how dangerous these fighters are to Joshua? Is there anyone in those rankings that you would be concerned about putting Joshua in with? Maybe you think this is a good move by Joshua, taking a direct shot against Charles Martin, because maybe you think there's nobody in that top 15 who you would pick to beat Joshua. So maybe he'll be able to continue the learning stages while champion, because there's no one in the top 15 of the IBF that's decent enough to beat him anyway. And what do you think about Charles Martin and his people taking a Joshua fight? Do they really not think Joshua is that good? Or are Charles Martin's team trying to cash out? Why wouldn't they be going for a unification with Wilder? Why wouldn't they give Martin some soft touches and then put him in a unification with Wilder? Interestingly enough, Charles Martin obviously is advised by Al Heyman. Why would Al Heyman want to put him in with Joshua when he has the opportunity to keep 2 world titles, 2 heavyweight titles in his stable and in the United States? Why would he risk it against Joshua, losing one of those titles? It's interesting, isn't it? So, yeah, drop your comments in the comment section below, people. I'll be very, very intrigued to hear what you guys have got to say about this. Do you think Joshua's going to beat Charles Martin? Do you think Charles Martin is better than advertised? Do you think the nerves maybe for fighting for his first world title in such a short space of time and, with so few fights and so little professional experience, do you think that will get to Joshua and that will allow Charles Martin to do better than people think? But then again, Charles Martin himself hasn't had a great deal of fights. He's not that experienced as a professional or as an amateur either. So, yeah, let me know how you feel, people. How's this fight going to go? And drop some comments on everything I've talked about in the video. It's your boy Hatman, I'm out.